The film is so bizarre, so beyond the perimeters of reality. I didn't feel like it was an invasion of privacy. David had a free hand. Those are words from author William S. Burroughs on David Cronenberg's 1991 film, Naked Lunch. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about Naked Lunch. So a quick synopsis of the film is, after developing an addiction to the substance he uses to kill bugs, an exterminator accidentally kills his wife and becomes involved in a secret government plot being orchestrated by giant bugs in a port town in North Africa. The tagline for the film is, David Cronenberg and William S. Burroughs invite you to lunch. The film stars Peter Weller as Bill Lee, Judy Davis as Joan Frost and Joan Lee, Ian Holm as Tom Frost, Julian Sands as Eve Cloquet, and Roy Scheider as Dr. Benway. It's written by David Cronenberg, cinematography by Peter Shishitsky, directed by David Cronenberg, edited by Ronald Sanders, music by Ornette Coleman and Howard Shore, and costumes by Denise Cronenberg. Today, my guest is Josh Cooley. I know Josh from the Royal Film Club, been a member for a while now, and I feel like we get along really well. We have similar taste in films, and even when we don't have similar taste in certain people, we can find common ground, and I really appreciate that in you. And just your presence in the club has been great, and love getting to know you a bit more over the past months. But before we get into the film today that we're talking about, Naked Lunch, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. I'm really excited to have you on today.
Thank you for having me.
I know that you have a background in film to some capacity, and you just have a very vast knowledge in film. I'm wondering when you started watching film on a more serious level, in quotes, going outside of what's in the mainstream and trying to go back and watch other films.
Yeah, that all started in my teens. I'd always been into film as an escapist, in an escapist way. But then the internet came around just at the right time for me, and I was introduced to a lot of people out there who were like, check out this Woody Allen. If you didn't like, Deconstructing Harry, maybe you would like Annie Hall or Manhattan better. I met somebody online that was a big Cronenberg fan, and they kept on quoting Dead Ringers and stuff, and it all sort of went into that. And I tried, my life was so movie focused for so long. I mean, my second job was at a movie theater, and I worked at almost every movie theater in town, and then video stores. I was just totally ensconced. It was the only thing that made me happy, and I was always making little movies and stuff. And yeah, so then went to film school, tried to break in a little bit, but you know how that goes sometimes.
Yep. You don't have to tell me, I definitely feel that on the same wavelength. But that's really cool that you were able to work at movie theaters and video stores, because I think that's a great culture. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, we don't have as many video stores anymore. If any, I know Toronto has a couple, and some bigger cities will have one or two, but the movie theater culture, I don't think it would be the same as it was prior to the age that we're in right now. I think, at least for when I go, it seems a little different than a few years back.
Definitely.
But you mentioned you met a friend who introduced you to Cronenberg. Do you remember the first time you watched Naked Lunch, and what got you onto watching it? What your initial thoughts were on that first watch?
You'd think I would remember the first time, but it kind of gets mixed up with Dead Ringers and Crash and a few others around the same time. I'd seen The Fly on television, his remake. I'd seen The Dead Zone also on television. But, he wasn't really on my radar as much as some until I was like 16 or 17. And then, I started watching these. And so they kind of just sort of become one thing. I feel like I watched them all at the same time. And I was just agog. I just loved every single one. And, particularly Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch. I think they're very different, in so much in feel. But I rewatched Dead Ringers again in preparation for this, and
Nice.
uh, I just, I think it was this. You can look at the progression from those earlier films like Shivers and Rabbit. I never
Yeah.
saw the racing one. Was it?
Oh yeah. I haven't seen that one either. Isn't it like Fast Company?
Okay.
Um, it's been on my list because it's kind of hard to find, but I found I'm gonna try and watch it as I record this series. But that's one of the two movies of his I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I all the ones that look straighter, I just have a hard time
Yeah.
excited enough to go watch them. But the you look at the Rabbit and Shivers as this monster thing, and it's got sex or sexually transmitted diseases or whatever, being the metaphor, and then he gets to the brood, and it becomes this much more personal thing, and
Hmm.
he may have thought maybe he over-explained it a little bit at the end. Oliver Reed is like, no, the babies are her rage.
Yeah.
uh, you know, so you get to Naked Lunch is sort of like this culmination of the weird, like I'm going to give you all the answers, or I'm going to, it's obviously going to be heightened and this fantasy, version of abstractions of all of these psychological ideas, but it's still going to be fun and interesting. It's that one
Hmm.
step past Dead Ringers, where Dead Ringers was like this beautiful tale of misery and codependent behavior. The Naked Lunch is this just weird comedy that's got a lot of dark things in it, but it's just perfect for my sensibilities. I adored it from the first moment.
Yeah. That's like a perfect way of putting, I think, the two vibes that he put out, especially before he switched over, before we get to like the history of violence era. It was either something super kind of dark and depressing or something a bit sillier. Not that this is silly, but it has a sense of humor. And I do think Cronenberg has a really great sense of humor, even if some people might not read it that way. But I definitely feel like he does. I watched this for the first time. I don't know. I feel like it was 15 years ago at this rate. Like I was just out of high school or in my last year of high school, and I just read the book because I'd been wanting to read the book. I was kind of in that phase of my life where I was like, oh, I want to read all those authors. Read the book, and I'm sure we'll get into my thoughts on that. But I wasn't a fan, but heard there was a movie, so I was like, okay, let me watch it. And I think I just watched it too close to reading it that I was like, I enjoy this more, but I'm not fully sold on it. So definitely had a better watch this time, especially giving space and time to it. So we can definitely get into it because I'm excited to chat about it.
Was this second viewing?
Second full viewing because I'd seen it in parts. Because oddly enough, Canadian television's weird where we'll play stuff like this like in full, but it won't be censored. I don't know why. They play a lot of. That's how I'd seen a lot of Cronenberg as a younger. They would just play some of his stuff on TV. So I would like pop in. I'd be like, "Oh, Naked Lunch is playing," and you'd see like the last hour or so, or the last 45 minutes. But this is the first time I'd seen it in full again, and definitely the first time I watched it, it didn't look as good as it does with the Criterion release. I was like, oh wow, this is not how I remember it looking. It looks great. It looks beautiful. I definitely want to buy a copy now of it because I don't have this one.
It's a beautiful Blu-ray. I had the DVD. I had it on VHS. The first time I watched it was VHS.
Nice.
Yeah, it's Peter Shushitsky's lighting is so gorgeous. It looks great in every medium I've seen it.
It's one that I feel like can definitely, even in a grainier look, because I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if I watched it and it was like a VHS rip the first time I saw it. I think I rented it from the library. But for anyone listening who doesn't know, which I assume you do if you're listening, you've watched the film, you know this is based on a book by the same title by William S. Burroughs. It's a very interesting book, to say the least. There's a lot going on in it, and it seems like something that would be pretty impossible to adapt because of just everything that's going on in this book and the mindset this character's in and the trip essentially that he's on. So it takes for a specific mind to adapt this, to have the audacity to adapt it, and then kind of just take the basis of it and put his own spin and create his own entire world. You've read the book as well?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm remiss in that. I've only read a little bit of Burroughs, actually, just Junkie and oh God, I think I started Queer, and I don't know. I find him a little too depressing, or at least
Yeah.
about time. I haven't gotten back, but I meant to try reading Naked Lunch. I know it definitely turns a lot of people off.
Yeah. There's parts of it I did like, but most of it I'd be interested to see as an adult now reading it again. Maybe I'd have even less patience for it, but you can understand if you've even read kind of snippets of his other stuff or even know anything about him, kind of what the vibe is of the book. But what this film does is kind of just, in my opinion, surpasses the source material, which is not something you get often with film adaptations. How do you feel about Cronenberg kind of just taking this story like this and being like, I'm just going to insert it into a world that I've created, which is very much his deal, what he likes to do, but it's a choice.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love what he did with Crash similarly, because I did read that one, and he gets the feel of it with while making it a new thing, which is just it's such a talent. And it's kind of like, his Fly remake, even, people
Mhm.
knew the source material, and then he put his Cronenberg spin on it. So sort of what he's known for, well, Dead Zone, but that much less so. And so, he says on his commentary on the Criterion disc that he took the beginning and a lot of the bug stuff from Exterminator short
Mhm.
story. Then he quoted things throughout it, but he wanted to make it more a biopic. And I thought very much, it might have been, this is 91, so it might have been influenced by another of my favorite films, Mishima, Life in Four Chapters, which also did
Mhm.
something where it took different pieces of an author's work, cobbled them together, and made a biography of them that's much more than just, he went here on May 2nd. And
Yeah.
so much more beautiful. And I really hate biopics. So I really appreciate that fusion that happens in Naked Lunch, particularly.
For sure. I think that's probably the smartest thing you could do with this. And I can't imagine anyone trying to make their own adaptation of this because it's just, yeah, the source material is a bit rough to get through. And I just remember reading it, and he does a really good job of putting you in a world the way I was visually, you know, experiencing it, obviously as reading it, is not the way it was in the Cronenberg world. And I love that because he's created this whole thing. And then you see it later in his other films because rewatching it, I was like, oh, this made me want to watch Existence because it's very much visually the same thing that he's created there. And that's definitely one of my favorites.
Oh,
I know
yeah,
that people don't love that one as much, but I always find that one a lot of fun.
me
And it's
too.
kind of like sort of, pairing to this, I find. So to be able to create such a visual world, it's something that we don't get often. And it's just the pairing of all the people involved. Like you said, like the cinematography, the lighting, the set design, the costumes are beautiful. And I really, really noticed it on this one. But before, because I definitely want to talk about that, but before, just still kind of talking about the literary influences, because Cronenberg is a huge, you know, he's written his own work. Really, he's known for being influenced by a lot of literary text, and you see that in a lot in his other works. Here, we're not only him, but the source material also is relying a lot on Kafka, and I think Cronenberg leaned into it a lot more than Burroughs did. I don't know if you're familiar or the audience familiar with Metamorphosis. I'm sure you know the idea of it, even if you haven't read it. This is also kind of an adaptation of that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, I think it's great. Again, on the commentary, Cronenberg says that he talked to Burroughs about it, and Burroughs was just like, "Yeah, go for it." And he even came to the set and saw the Chris Walas beautiful puppets, and he just thought they were the cutest things in the world. And I agree. I think they're wonderful. And from the way Cronenberg tells it, he says that he was writing this while he was in London on shooting Clive Barker's Nightbreed, which is really fun. Terrible movie, but great Daniel. And it just sort of seemed to he got the idea, for the machines becoming more insect-like and having a personality because it was his first Toshiba laptop. And so he said he kept on feeling like it was writing itself and it had a personality. And he noted that insects would come and be attracted to the screen while he was writing and sit there and look at it and look at him. So I think it came from this very organic place. And you feel that, Cronenberg is always sort of seeking to rip the skin off of stuff in a very Clive Barker way, but without, I don't know, you could say without as much gore. It feels more psychological and less visceral with him. Yeah. And you always have that sort of cool, removed aspect. So, when you're talking about a character that is going through a transformation, I don't want to get to it too early, but the realization that I made this time while watching it at the end, like I said, I'm not sure if it's something so obvious that everybody would be like, oh, but the film is about William Burroughs becoming a writer and how he became. And so perfect to use metamorphosis as a sort of foundation.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And that was another one. I was a big fan of the Metamorphosis and Kafka. I still am, but that was very much, when you're a teenager and you're getting into all that era, everyone goes through it. Well, a lot of people go through it. So it's definitely in that era of my life. So it all hit me at the same time. So Cronenberg obviously was perfect for that because that's very much his vibe. But I like what you said. It's, the transformations in the body horror, which he's known for, is never gory. And sometimes it can be, but it still feels so clinical. Like it feels like you're just watching like a surgery happen. And he later will do stuff like that in his films where surgery is a lot of things, but it always seems very medical. Like it's an exploration of the body, which I also want to talk about a bit. But you also mentioned puppets, and we get a lot of practical effects, which he has continued to do. We still see that even in his most recent film, Crimes of the Future, practical effects, something that he's known to do and has always worked, and proves that more people should continue doing that because it just lends to an, even if you're like, well, I can see that this is not real, doesn't seem real, it's real within the sphere of the story and the universe that he's created, and it looks great. As a side note, we have at the TIFF Lightbox in Toronto, we have some of the little creatures. They have like big statues of them within there, so you can like people take pictures of them, which is funny. Yeah.
Oh, great.
It's funny. I don't know where it is now in there. They usually move it around within the theater, but you always see people taking pictures with it. But it's what makes his films one of the reasons why his films are so memorable. How do you feel about that? The use of practical effects in this, and because it's really heavy in this one.
Oh yeah, no, I think they're so beautiful. That mugwump sitting at the bar smoking a cigarette. Cronenberg said that he's sort of supposed to look like a junky alien version of Burroughs, sort of hunched and gaunt. And smoking a cigarette. And so it's beautiful. I remember seeing pictures of it in magazines, I think around the time, well before I saw it. And it's an iconic image. It's beautiful. And I love how it's constantly changing. You get the little bug at first, which looks tiny. It's got to be like maybe 8 inches or something. With the talking asshole, of course. Yeah. And And the beautiful voice too of the coworker guy that you don't meet until after you meet the bug first, which I think is great. And he does all the voices for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Or that wonderful echoing that he's constantly pre-echoing he's doing in the movie. But then as a pre-echo, also the bug then becomes the much larger Clark Nova typewriter, and it's transformed. Then the Martinelli typewriter, the Mujahideen, I'm butchering the pronunciation. The Martinelli becomes a mugwump head that he's typing into, and then suddenly it's this full figure. It's gorgeous, and it's constantly keeping you on your toes. I mean, some of like what they apparently called the sex blob, the one that sort of writhes around on top of Peter Weller and Judy Davis at one scene and one part. That one has always been a little bit weak, in my opinion. I mean, it's very beautiful, but like when it sort of jumps out on the porch to jump off the railing down to the ground. You can see a lot of wires in there.
Yeah.
It's been very obvious. Maybe I'm misconstruing Fidela's writing crop or something, but getting in the way. But it certainly looks like a cable. Feels just a little too messy, and it feels a little too hollow in some weird way. But then, later on, he says the most embarrassing one is the one where Julian Sands as a centipede is attacking Kiki in the birdcage. Cronenberg says it's the weakest one. But I think with the music and the weirdness of the sound of the disconnect of the birds squawking and the moaning, it's so weird and funny and creepy all at the same time. I think it's great. And, they're probably part of the funniest thing, and I think it's probably his funniest movie, Naked Lunch. Besides Existence, I think Existence and Naked Lunch are funniest movies. when he throws a bottle or something towards Clark Nova at one point, and the whole bug typewriter puppet freezes up, and pulls back and says something about you caused me a lot of anxious moments, Bill. It's so beautiful. It's so well acted when he gets anxious because Ian Holm is coming to, or Ian Holm's friend are coming towards him, trying to put him in the sack, and he sort of pulls back and then jumps off the desk in a mad dash to get to the door, and then Ian Holm closes the door and the typewriter hits it and has that wonderful ding sound effect. It's funny. It's beautiful. There's a texture to the lighting on it, on all of them, that is so beautiful. I adore it. I think it's a great choice to go with these Chris Walas effects.
I mean, I don't even want to imagine this film without them. I mean, he wouldn't have made that film. It would have to be someone else making this film. But I love all those scenes. The one in the birdcage, he might dislike it, but I think you're just kind of so horrified by the whole thing that you can't even, I don't know that. It would take me several watches to notice any mistakes that he feels that scene has. And even like the flashing back to Lee or Peter Weller, and it's just like dripping sweat. You could see the huge drops of sweat. And I was like, yeah, that would be me too in that situation. I'm also glad that you think that Cronenberg has a sense of humor. I think any actual real Cronenberg fan knows that. And I've been lucky enough to be able to see him a couple times in Toronto at screenings. And one, which if any of my friends are listening, have probably heard me say this story a million times, but I'm going to say it again. It's one of my favorites. But when I was in film school and the TIFF Bell Lightbox, and again, for anyone listening, TIFF is the Toronto International Film Festival here. They opened their own film, like cinema here in Toronto while I was in film school. At this rate now, it's obviously over 10 years old to date myself there a bit. But when they opened it, before they opened it for the general public, they invited film students to come to a screening. So we kind of went on a field trip. I can't remember if we knew what the film was, but we're all like, whatever, we're going to go see a movie. So we get there and they say we're playing Videodrome. We're like, okay, cool. I'd seen it before and I was like, I've never seen it in theater, so I'm happy to go see it. And then Cronenberg walks out to introduce it, and everyone, obviously, a bunch of film students are just like wetting themselves. So he introduces it, and then he comes back out for a Q&A. And it's like, I personally am not a huge fan of Q&As with audiences because people ask the worst questions. So he got a lot of stupid questions of people asking him, like, what was the meaning of this? And he's like, I just thought it'd be funny. He's just very relaxed. He's like, he just did not take any. No, he wasn't being dismissive. He was like, there's not a deeper meaning. Some things do, but a lot of things don't. He just was like, I thought it'd be cool to do this. And I was like, that's super punk rock of him. It's so cool. So he's very relaxed and chill. You think about if you see him in person talking, seems like the most relaxed person, and then he's putting these images on screen. It's always like the quiet ones that are the weirdest.
No, he's great. And Videodrome in particular, yeah, it's I don't know how widely known, but it was part of that early tax relief. They'd always get the funds for it like really late, and then they would have to rush it, and just do it like really fast. And so apparently the ending of a Videodrome, they didn't have it. They didn't have anything, or he had something, but he didn't like it, and they were just shooting for some ridiculously long amount of time until they just sort of came up with that one option that they went with. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit more relaxing to watch some of his movies if you know that they were just sort of run through, and particularly the early ones, and sort of trying to make the day, and don't have specific one-for-one meanings attached to every little thing. And it's great that he has style and talent to pull it off with all these other collaborators, that it works.
No, I love that. It's kind of similar with Lynch too, where I'm sure, he's very obviously very famous for being like, I am never going to talk about the meaning of things. And the sense where you're like, I'm sure half of this has no meaning. He just thought it up and he was like, I'm going to film it. And I have immense respect for that. Because why not? Not everything has to have a deeper meaning. And I know that's what film scholars are supposed to do. I know that's what we're supposed to do when you're in film school, just deconstruct everything. But half the time, it's just because they only had the funds for do this versus that. Not to diminish what he's doing here, obviously, but just facts. And hey, look at what he's been able to put out with this huge body of work and this film in particular. But one of the things I want to talk about, because what I notice in a lot of his films is the way he not only kind of shoots sex scenes or people talking about sexuality, the way they interact with the concept of it. Like we said with the gore, it's kind of medical and clinical, and no one seems to have that many emotional ties to it. It seems like it's people just doing this physical act. They're exploring each other's bodies, and they're more interested in seeing how they can push the limits without having that many emotional ties. We see a lot of those scenes in this film and the way they talk about sexuality. So I want to talk about that before I get into I also want to talk about the queer aspects of this film too. So just in terms of the way he navigates sexuality in this film and in other films that you've seen, how do you feel about the way he goes about it?
I've always appreciated it. His clinical approach to it seems to be best summed up in Dead Ringers, from the year or a couple of years before. It's, apparently the scene towards the beginning of the movie with the two twins, they look very much like Cronenberg as a kid, apparently. And the way they're, talking about sex, how you wouldn't have, humans wouldn't have sex at all if we lived underwater, because you wouldn't need it. That's like the beginning of and then he invites or one of the twins invites a neighborhood girl to experiment having sex with them in a tub, and you can't tell, well, I mean, that's a different discussion, but it seems to sum up very well what Cronenberg's feelings are. I've always been about its interest, but from a very I want to understand it. You're talking about how he doesn't necessarily want to make things perfectly understandable metaphorically. I think he wants to do that exactly though with sex. He wants to understand it from every level, but he's also, I don't know, it's weird because he also wants to keep this distance from it. I mean, it's always there, and that and Crash particularly, even in Butterfly, and I mean, is it really in existence? Is there any sexuality in a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
But it's mainly the pods that are sexual.
Yeah. It's weird. I do like to mention, like, he does kind of have his hand out as he's examining. It's sort of like, and I don't want to, put any labels on him, but there's a sense of like an asexuality to him where he's interested in the act, but it's not, yeah, there's no emotional ties to it. It's like with asexual people, they could still engage in sexual acts, but there's no emotional or sexual interest in it. Nothing seems sexy. None of the sex scenes in his movies, even in Crash, they're not sexy. The one where you're looking at it and you're like, oh, there's something that he's exploring here, and I'm not, at least I personally am not turned on. I don't know that many people are watching the scenes in most of his movies. And I think that's interesting because you don't see that often in films with sex scenes. When one where you're like, he's obviously going for something and he's examining something, he's theorizing, but he's not trying to tantalize the audience. I don't know how you feel about that, where it's like it's not something to turn on the audience, or it's something for them to also kind of engage in from the outside.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that, most critics seem to, and most people seem to misunderstand about Crash so much when it came out. And you can see it really on display in the Jeremy Irons, Geneviève Bujold sex scene where she's tied up with all the surgical gear, and it's just and then Naked Lunch, the scene where the Peter Weller and Judy Davis are typing, and in Arabic, and you get that wonderful like 5-stage transition from this typewriter coming, the keys turn over and she's putting them, and then this phallus comes out the end and it starts breathing, and then it grows a rib cage and it becomes this sort of Giger like sex demon. It just sort of, the culmination is that it just sort of flops around on Peter Weller and Judy Davis on the floor until Fidela comes in and whips it out the window. But it just seems like a joke, it's the whole thing's, and it seems also particularly in line with his body horror thing. I mean, I think the sexual thing is probably very apt because you see something like the pods and existence where you turn them on literally by rubbing like this weird little nipply section that then starts them sort of undulating. It just feels kind of gross but interesting. You can feel him sort of raising one eyebrow and sort of getting a magnifying glass out and looking closer. He also said on the commentary for Naked Lunch that he always thought he would be a novelist. So, and he says in the commentary for the scene where Bill comes in, or Lee comes in, and Jack Kerouac and his wife are making out on the couch while Ginsberg, whatever his name is in the movie, is reading this mantra poetry. And he said that all writers are, naturally voyeuristic, and sex is not off the table of topics of things to be watched. So I think I don't know why he keeps on putting it so prominently. If it's not as big of a deal to him, but maybe it's just sort of a reaction to a world that he doesn't understand. I know he does have children, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's like you said, he does keep, it's like a reoccurring thing that he continues to do, and it's come back in his work. I feel like he's started to go back into that. And even a film like Cosmopolis, there's a couple sex scenes, but Pattinson's character seems disengaged, and it's like it's a thing that he needs to just do or is interested in doing, but there's no emotional ties to it. It doesn't seem like he's even fully present for it. And that just seems to be the case for a lot of his films. It's interesting. I don't know that he'll ever admit to why that is. I don't think it even really matters, but it is something that he obviously is still trying to figure out. And who knows if he ever will. Who knows if anyone will ever figure out anything about sex. But I definitely want to talk about the queer aspects of this film because it's something that comes up also in his other films too. I don't think it's just in this one. It's a bit more overt in this film. And I do remember those aspects from the book as well. So portion of that is also him adapting that and Burroughs' personal explorations. But it's weird because when you see scenes like that and the way it's kind of brought up, the way they talk about the character's queerness at the beginning before he goes into it the first time, it's the 90s. It's always going to be offensive. Doesn't matter who's doing it. There's always offensive language. How do you feel about the way the film explores it, though? Even if, not having read the book, don't know anything about the book, just knowing the way it comes up in his other films, how do you feel about it in this one?
I always appreciated it. Side note, you didn't use this, but my husband Lee's and my favorite moment from Maps to the Stars was talking about his relationship with sex. Is I've only seen it once, but Julianne is nervous, or one character is nervous about having sex with others, and they sort of pull themselves out of it, go outside, and walks up and says, impatiently, "Why don't you just take a Klonopin?" Favorite lines to somebody gets into a stressful situation, but that just seems part of his I'm going to get myself out of this sex.
That's actually interesting. I need to rewatch that one. I've only seen it once also.
I've been meaning to rewatch now for nearly 10 years. I remember not particularly enjoying most of it, but then sort of thinking at the end that maybe it was better than I thought. But in Naked Lunch, though, I guess I saw it in the mid, to late 90s. It didn't feel, there is the F slur at one point. It's being said, by Bill Lee, who with this. And, apparently Burroughs didn't like to be called gay. He liked queer much better. So, I don't know. The way it's dealt with it seems as fluid as how Cronenberg sees sexuality, because, everybody is sort of having very different, strange interactions. You've got Joan Frost, the second Judy Davis character, saying that they came to Morocco for the boys, and like her and Ian Holm, her husband. So, you've got this, they're a married couple, but they both came for young male prostitutes. But then she also has a relationship with Fidela, this very strange power dynamic that apparently is based on a real character, Sharifa, who was very powerful in the Paul and Jane Bowles life in Tangier. So I don't know, it's you feel like it's dealt with from a more hetero lens. Yes, and he doesn't go as far as, I don't know. I mean, it seems like when you see Kiki, that one scene you see Kiki in bed with Bill, it feels like a reveal, like, oh, does anyone know this? And he's got the first line that the transformed insect Clark Nova makes him type into himself is a great cover or whatever for any agent. And so it's interesting. You would have to deal with it in particular in this one in a weirdly ambivalent way because apparently that's how Burrough has always treated it. I mean,
Yeah.
he would say that he was queer, but he did have this heterosexual marriage, and apparently they did. It was consummated, and it wasn't his first, and so you know, it's just it's tricky. Everything's on the spectrum, and I feel like Cronenberg, maybe what he's trying to say with sex is the more you try to nail it down and define it so neatly, the more it slips away from you.
That's an interesting way of looking at it for sure. I think that's aligned to what I think too. I never think that he is, throwing in these concepts or being judgmental or making fun of. It never feels like he's making fun of, even if there's maybe the people within it are a little bit apprehensive, but then you kind of feel like everyone's a bit pansexual in this movie, and there's no specific preferences. And think again for him at Cronenberg, Burroughs, the characters within the film is just about exploring one another. As we know, Cronenberg obviously has an obsession with bodies in general, let alone in a sexual way. But it's interesting in this one for sure. One of the last points that I wanted to bring up before I pass it over to you to see what I haven't brought up yet was I'm a huge fan of film noir and those kind of pulpy stories. The way he's navigating this is kind of like a, detective story, a bit of a noir shot in color, down to the way they're dressed, the way they're speaking, the way he's directing Peter Weller to interact within it. Peter Weller, a lot of the times I was like, I kind of had to rewind a few times. I was like, I can't hear what you're saying. You're mumbling. You're just kind of slurring through. And that's kind of like the way, a Humphrey Bogart-esque type of, noir character would kind of navigate through those worlds. How do you feel about the idea of kind of shooting it through that trope of the film noir? Because I'm trying to remember from when I'm reading it if it had that vibe, and I don't recall it having that vibe. So I think this is a Cronenberg flourish.
Yeah, I think he was basing the look, at least, of Peter Weller's character on Burroughs at the time, that the movie was sort of set. And
Mhm.
so, taking the sort of these beat era authors and putting them into this thing didn't seem too far off the map. And then, to it's interesting. I don't know. Again, not knowing, not being as well versed as I should be in Burroughs' writing, I'm not sure how much these parts come up in there. But the way he says that, I think there's a scene where one of the Clark Nova typewriter says something like, everyone experiences these painful moments, but writers, file reports on them, and
Mm.
so to give him this job of sort of a spy, he's a spy for his life as a writer.
Yep.
He's a watcher, he's an observer, and he reports. And he looks at those reports very differently depending on what state of mind, what frame of mind he's in, depending on whatever drug he's on. So, then you get, I'm not sure if he's saying that Burroughs was a full-on paranoid schizophrenic, or just that what I believe that extreme isolation always sort of breeds paranoia and paranoid thought.
Yeah.
But that leads you to all of this stuff about, women are a different species, that everybody's a secret agent. If you, a different typewriter, somebody else's typewriter, it's an enemy agent. Uh,
Mhm.
all of these things that might be influencing you and trying to destroy you. And so it feels very life or death, although it's all of the typical spy plotting is nonsense, because
Yeah.
it's all in his head. So it just has to sound as believable as I suppose, like a QAnon thing, for someone to latch on and say, "Oh yeah, well, isn't that scary?" And maybe lend it some credence. So I think it's just sort of a happy merger of just the natural wanting to make it look nice and rich and dark and period, and then have this paranoid character that's feels like he has a job reporting on life. It's very Philip K. Dick, I guess, in that way.
I think that's perfectly put. Like I do remember those aspects from the book as well of him, the paranoia, but it just reads more so like he's going on like obviously really bad trips. I think this makes it more digestible and yet still doesn't like hand feed to the audience, hey, this is what's going on. He's just doing it in a way that's not like, because someone else could have adapted this and been like, I'm just going to make this psychedelic trip of a film where this is not this way. It is a trip, but not in the way where you feel like, oh, I need to be on drugs to watch this. Although I'm sure people do to watch it. And I don't know that I would want to be in that place. I don't know that I would trust my mind to be on drugs and watch Naked Lunch. But yeah, that would be an experience, I'm sure. Are there parts of the story, the filmmaking that we haven't chatted about that you want to bring up?
I don't know. There's so much.
Yeah.
I had a friend over this past weekend to watch it with us, and she had a lot of questions at the end. She'd already seen it before, but just wondering various things about what Cronenberg was thinking with different imagery, and there are a lot of questionable moments for sure. I mean, and Roy Scheider comes out of Fidelia at the end, and he's got this. She's smoking this almost completely full cigar, and Benway comes out. He holds onto it for a second and then throws it into the water. There's a big moment made of the close up of the cigar hitting and being doused by the water. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I don't know, but the one thing that I had never fully made, I don't know, clear in my head until this last viewing was the last scene. I guess, do you worry about spoilers?
No, yeah, we can spoil. I assume people have watched it, so spoil ahead.
The last scene where he drives up to the border of Annexia, and two cops from the beginning of the movie are there, and asking the same line of questions, that they asked towards the beginning. If you're an exterminator, prove to us that you're an exterminator. And he says he's a writer. Prove to us that you're a writer. And so he turns around and does the William Tell routine again with now his Joan Frost, the vision of his dead wife, doing this thing. And I'd always understood that apparently this was based on a real event in Burroughs' life, where it was a party in Mexico, I believe, and there were several people around, and they were all getting wasted. And one of them said, "Let's do our William Tell routine." They had never had a William Tell routine, nothing like that. She just puts this glass on her head, and he fires, and he knew apparently that the gun shot low, and he aimed at the glass, and it shot her in the forehead and killed her. So I always knew that he was saying, that the way he became a writer was to try to make up for this accidental death, or as almost accidents at one point. So the at the end of the movie, when he does it again, and that's what proves that he's a writer. It's the only time, I believe, I'd have to go back and watch the movie again to make sure on this. I believe it's the only time you get this one particular Howard Shore cue of music, where it's just sort of building dissonant orchestra getting louder and louder, this sort of feeling of dread and realization. And it's the only other time it happens is right before the first time he's there, where he goes into market and he finds centipedes on the sticks, and he picks it up, and that's the Naked Lunch moment where he sees what's on the other end of his fork or whatever, this the Naked Lunch, where you realize what you're eating, how horrible it is, this. And so that music plays again at the end of the movie when he shoots her. It's different than the music earlier in the film for that same scene when he shoots her. He plays again, and he has a very similar reaction on his face where he sort of looks up and he's just all the weight of this horror is all hitting him and
Hmm.
know what to do with it. And so, in effect, I was noticing that she becomes the titular Nate Lunch, Judy Davis at the end, because without
Mm.
her death, he wouldn't have become a writer. And in that moment, he realizes it. And that's what leads him to Annexia, which you could say is the next place or annexing other people's lives into your work. But it's really just that that ultimate thing that I think everybody has to recognize whenever you have a tragedy in life. You only have one option, really. I mean, you could go into despair and say, "I'm going to get drowned in it," or
Hmm.
you could come out and try to make something better or more positive out of it. So you really only have one choice.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really beautiful. And I I talk too much about scores, but I think Howard Shore's score is brilliant, amazing
Hmm.
score for Cronenberg. And I think this one really stands out, and it's because I think you'd think that it might be hard or it might be easy to write the Ornette Coleman jazz riffs because it just sounds like you threw a bunch of notes onto a piece of paper and said,
Yeah.
but until I tried personally writing anything that weird, I didn't realize how crazy difficult it is, and to make it sound effortless, it's really great.
I mean, I'm glad that you brought it up because I was going to ask you your thoughts on the score because I know you're, in my mind now, expert on scores. I love his when he works with Howard Shore, and this one is one I definitely remember and noticed even more on this. And like as you said, it sounds effortless. It sounds like it could be like they just put on a record, like someone else, like an older jazz record, which is a compliment to Howard Shore, as opposed to him saying that he ripped it. It's great, and I think it works so well with just the visuals of this film. And I definitely want to rewatch it now too, just to hear the parts that you were talking about with the Judy Davis character before the shooting. I forgot to mention before we didn't really talk too much about performances. I did try and reserve a bit space for that. I thought they're great. Peter Weller's great. Judy Davis, I love. I think she's probably my favorite. I just love both the characters she plays. She looks great in it. Her hair looks great. I was like, oh man, I wish my hair looked that good. But no, I thought they were great. Even with Peter Weller and me not fully understanding what he was saying half the time, I was like, I think this is obviously the way you're being directed, and you're doing a great job at it. So, did you have any favorite performances, ones that stood out to you?
I love everybody. I love also, a lot of people I've talked to don't appreciate this when you can recognize the director's work from the actors,
Mm.
not just, and I appreciate that. I think it's great. Give completely different performances. Judy Davis and Barton Fink the same year. I mean,
Mhm.
radically different. So great. I love her in that. But she's wonderful. Even even Roy Scheider's good.
Yep.
And I'm always a huge fan of his. Ian Holm is wonderful.
Hmm.
That scene where they're talking and they're walking through the street in Tangier, and he talks about, people are saying you murdered your wife. Is it true? Because I might be slowly murdering mine. So I'm using all of these whatever Fidelia to slowly kill her, and then you realize that the conversation is actually happening telepathically, which is another paranoid schizophrenic trope.
Hmm.
Ian Holm, he's just those deadpan looks, and that overhead shot of him, Peter Weller looking down at him, just the subtle things that he does with his eyes, and that are just so lovely. And he's such an amazing actor. You can see him do wildly different performances. And then the guy that's in like several other ones, he's in Existence and Scanners and The Brood.
Yeah, I know. I can see who you're talking about because I know in the Brood he has like the thing around his neck.
Yes.
I just forget what the actor's name is.
Yes, I'm really bad. Silverman. Robert A. Silverman. He is so freaking wonderful. I love every choice he makes.
Yeah.
Uh, he's probably my favorite performance in the movie. I love every time he comes in. His big smiles and oh yes,
Yeah. I love when he pops up in Cronenberg movies.
always welcome.
Yeah.
And the guy that Ian Holm has with him, the companion, who always looks
Mhm.
worth.
Yeah, everyone's so like unique, and even the actors that you recognize, like Ian Holm and Roy Scheider, they're not playing characters you've seen them play before. And I didn't realize that some people don't like when you can see that a director, is influencing heavily an actor's performance, but I love it because I think that's how it should be. That's the director's job. It's to feel like this is how I'm directing you. It's a collaboration, but I do prefer when there's that director's voice in there. And I don't know that much Peter Weller. Obviously, I've seen him in RoboCop, which is a movie I heavily dislike, but I like him in this. So I don't have a problem with him. I just dislike that movie.
I was just going to say that Paul Verhoeven was another one of those directors that I always know by the acting style.
Oh yeah, I love Verhoeven. Everything else apart from RoboCop, which gets me in a lot of trouble with a lot of friends. But before we move to the last segment, just want to make sure that there is no parts that you really want to chat about.
I love everything about it. It's hard to say. I love how it winds. I love how it always keeps you on your toes in all sorts of different ways. Also mentioned that they were originally going to shoot it in Morocco. The first Gulf War was happening around the same time, and they were just sort of like, should we shut down the movie completely?
Yeah.
And so they decided to just do everything in sound stages in Toronto. And I think it was such a great choice because I think, did you say that you liked M. Butterfly? Was it
Yeah.
you? I need to watch it again. I probably need to.
Same.
I didn't really connect with it, but I part of why I think I didn't connect with it is because I think they got too much access. They had to go out.
Mm.
It looks. I think it's distracting. But when you see, particularly in a story where everything is so much in the mind, when you see these flat translates outside the window that look a little off, it's a little bit weird, or saturation is strange. I think it really helps. I think it works very well. It's kind of like, I think one of the most beautiful movies ever made was Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I think because of all those beautiful practical effects and how everything is just totally done in the camera, and you feel that smallness, that beauty, that handcrafted beauty of it, just bursting off the screen, rather than if somebody just went and was like, oh well, the landscape is beautiful on its own.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it would have just taken you so far out of this story and the world that he's created if it all of a sudden they were shooting on location, because everything else feels kind of claustrophobic. The other sets, the apartments they're in, and other locations that all of a sudden, if they were in the actual desert, I would have been like, oh, what's going on here? Now I feel like I need to resituate myself. Whereas you never feel that because he's like, he throws you in right away. He's not trying to build the world. He's like, this is the world. You're in it and you're here for the next 2 hours. And it's not even 2 hours. I feel like it's just under, which is wild to be able to pack that much into an under 2 hour film. He's very good with, he's very tight with his run times. And that's another reason why we have to love Cronenberg. Efficient.
He just keeps everything moving, and like I said, keeps you on your toes the whole time. It's always never knowing exactly what you're looking at. Apparently sometimes he was doing, like, particularly when the Kerouac and Ginsberg characters come to meet him and go to his apartment to start sort of piecing together the pages for Naked Lunch, the book. You can see different parts of Morocco in that apartment, and different parts of New York
Mm.
together. So it's sort of just feel a little off kilter, and whether you notice it or not is up to you. And also, I really do like the that he used a fake drug to get a. I'm sure, again, actual paranoid schizophrenics would probably say, "Oh no, it's real," like the adrenochrome nonsense.
Yeah.
But uh, it's great that you have these things that aren't real, so you're not having to say, this is heroin, definitely, this is coke, this is crack, this is whatever, and that just sort of it relaxes the viewing a little bit, I think.
Yeah, because then you'd have people be like, well, that's not how people react on this drug. Whereas, like, it's one he invented. We don't know how people react other than the way he's telling us they would react. So that's definitely the smarter choice. So we'll move to the last segment of the show. And we're still talking Cronenberg. We're still talking Naked Lunch, but I have two more questions for you before I let you go. First is the starter film question. I know you've seen quite a bit of Cronenberg. If someone comes up to you and is like, I've never seen a single Cronenberg, where should I start? What film are you recommending to them?
Probably say the Fly remake. I think that's the
Yeah.
easiest. It slowly leads you down the path too, and it feels much more positive for a little while. And because you've got that relationship between Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum, it feels more fun and more like an adventure before it gets weird.
Yeah, that's very true. That's one I haven't seen in so long too. I've been wanting to, with this series, go back and watch stuff that I have only seen a couple times. But The Fly, I haven't seen in a long time. I think that's probably one that a lot of people saw first, even if they may not have known it was Cronenberg who made it. They've seen it in some capacity. So I could see that definitely could be a great starter film. I said Videodrome if you want to be prepped for the more body horror-esque, what he's known for. I say it in quotes. Or depending on the person, if I know this person really well and I know that they're not going to gravitate towards that right away, but they want more cerebral, then I probably would push them towards Dead Ringers if they want something on that end. But I would have to know them well enough to know that they would vibe with that. I feel like Videodrome or The Fly especially more because there's a bit more of a regular story leading up to it. That can ease you into it. Whereas Videodrome is less so. I think depending on the person, some people might need to be eased into it a little bit. If you're a bit of a freak, I guess, like us, you could just jump right in to stuff. But you can't really go wrong. Well, there's some that I probably wouldn't recommend right away, but
If you could start a little bit slower with him and then see him bloom in with Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch, I think it would be much more satisfying.
yeah, I agree. I mean, he's got such a great body of work that I'm envious of anyone who's going through it for the first time. And I think I was similar to you because you were saying you don't fully remember seeing this for the first time because you watched a bunch. It's kind of like once you get on the Cronenberg train, you're like, well, now I have to watch everything. So I watched a bunch of them back to back too, where I'm like, I don't remember this one as much as the other ones, so I need to go back. But that's the beauty of having them available and going back over a few years. But last question of the night is a double bill. So if you're going to pair Naked Lunch with another film or films, if you have a few options, what film are you going to pair that with, and what's the reason behind the pairing?
Intellectually, I would say what I said earlier about Mishima, because I think they're both interesting biopics, and my two favorite, because they don't focus on the mundanity of the life. They focus on only what's important to the story they're portraying, and using the work in organic ways to illustrate that, I think is really lovely. Plus, they're just both such wild, visually intriguing films. I guess
Hmm.
Mishima afterwards would be Naked Lunch, then Mishima.
Yeah, that's interesting. I still haven't seen it. I know we've talked about it briefly, and it's been on my list because I do love Schrader. I don't know why I haven't gotten around to it. I think you should, as a side note, recommend it for the film club because I feel like it'd be one that a lot of people would love to watch if they haven't seen it already. But I think that would be a great pairing. For me, I for some reason, because I think this film is so singular that it was harder for me to think of multiple pairings. So I thought of the first one as I was watching it, other than Existence, was Kiss Me Deadly, which is Robert Aldrich. It's a film from the 50s, and it's this film noir, but it kind of has this sci-fi element to it where the character is not really a detective, but is kind of forced into that detective role. And there's this government stuff going on. It kind of reminded me of this a lot. And I think I would start off with that and then get into Naked Lunch because Kiss Me Deadly is going to seem very soft after you watch Naked Lunch. But if you want to watch something that's going to prep you for that detective element of this, then I would recommend that one.
Yeah, and I mean, if I thought more along those lines, I mean, Existence would be a great pairing too. I would still probably put Naked Lunch first, because I think Existence would be sort of like a weird dessert afterwards.
Mm.
I think also, I mean, Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch are just such a great pairing to, for him, this new take on his body of work, this new way of moving forward. I don't know how much since you haven't seen The Fly in a while, but apparently there was Brooks Films really wanted to get it going. They didn't have, or they had a director, had some falling out or something, and I think Mel Brooks wanted Cronenberg, and
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
I think he asked something. I don't know the full story. It's been a little bit, but it was something like, he got $1 million. It was the biggest payday he ever got for that movie, and he just sort of describes it as this turning point where he just sort of relaxed, was able to say, "I'm going to do my own thing," and
Yeah.
seem to like it. And you can feel that starting with The Fly and then moving into Dead Ringers. It's like one of the Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch, I think, are the quintessential Cronenberg films.
I agree. I like that period where, as you said, he started to relax and was just like, okay, well, people are gravitating to what I want to make. I don't feel like I need to adhere to any other, genres or trying to, appease people or soften it. So that's great. I wish we could get more of that from people. I'm sure there's people trying, obviously, but it's harder nowadays.
I also haven't seen Cosmopolis or Crimes of the Future. Do you recommend them?
Um, I liked Crimes of the Future a lot. Cosmopolis, I was one that I watched, I think it was last year for the first time. I don't know why I'd been putting it off. I liked it a lot more than a lot of people did, but I could also see why people didn't like it. It's kind of along the same wavelength of that era of like Maps to the Stars and Cosmopolis are very similar in the way he kind of is like gliding through the film. So yeah, I would be like maybe watch those two back to back if you're gonna rewatch them because I think they pair the best. It's like a specific thing he's doing in those two.
You should really, I watched The Brood and Dead Ringers and the Naked Lunch. That's the best I could do to get ready for this. And it made me remember why I got so deeply into him when I was a teenager, and
Yeah.
I wish I hadn't let myself get totally thrown off by Spider.
Oh yeah. That's the other one that I haven't seen. Oh wait, so there's three. There's like the race car one, Spider, and I've never seen Eastern Promises, which I know is like a big one.
History of
That
Violence.
I've seen History of Violence once, and I know I need to rewatch it because I actively hated it. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh no, I didn't think I would ever hate a Cronenberg film, but I really didn't like it at all. And I'm wondering if it was just like a reaction to me being like, this is not what I was expecting. So I need to rewatch it. Who knows? I might still not like it.
Yeah, I don't even remember anything about Spider. I just remember that I watched it, I'm pretty sure right around the same time I watched that movie somebody else mentioned in the club recently, End of the Affair. And
Okay.
both of them had Ray Fiennes. I may be wrong. It's been so long. But I remember just being just like these horrible movies, these boring, wasted, pointless, styleless. Anyway,
That's fair. Well, the other movies that you watched in preparation, I'm actually covering. So I'm excited to rewatch those ones. I still think The Brood is my favorite, which I'll save for that episode too. But yeah, I mean, that was Naked Lunch. I think we did a good job at talking about it because it's one that's, there's obviously so much more to speak about, but there's only so much you can condense to a digestible conversation without feeling like you're going off kilter. But Josh, thank you so much for chatting with me about Naked Lunch. I think this will be the great way to open this series. This will be the first one for the Cronenberg series. So I'm excited.
invitation. I really appreciate it.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Ronnie, with intro music by The Mar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode on The Brood.